Hello, BookTube. All right, we're continuing with Q&As. I have no idea what number this is. I think it might be 4. We are on to Lisa Garrity. Margaret Atwood has said that Handmaid's Tale is not science fiction. I had thought that it was science fiction similar to Fahrenheit 451 or 1984. If it isn't science fiction, which genre would it be? It is, of course, science fiction. It's dramatizing the future. So it's science fiction. The only reason Margaret Atwood said it isn't is because she's a snob. She's a literary snob. So she doesn't want it to be science fiction. Kurt Vonnegut spent 50 years grousing about the same thing, carping about the genre that gave him the success enough to buy 3 houses and talk about himself nonstop. Margaret Atwood's the same way. Oh, it's not science fiction. Ew. Bug-eyed aliens? Laser fights? Oh, no. And her strongest adherents say that it transcends science fiction. It doesn't. It's just science fiction. And once you realize that, you realize that it's kind of poor science fiction. That it's kind of poor. So no wonder she doesn't want it to be called that. The world building is crappy. Makes no sense at all. Same thing with Cormac McCarthy, same thing with Kurt Vonnegut. So naturally they don't want it to be called science fiction because it's really bad if you call it that. But yeah, she's just wrong or lying or both. Let's see here. Clint Raimundo says, let's see here. Have you ever tried video games? If so, what were your thoughts on your first game? And if not, why not? I've never really tried them. I've watched when they were played, but I've never really tried one myself. It just holds no interest to me whatsoever. TRP says, you talk about how much you love biographies. What about biopics? Do you have some favorites? I tend to like them. They're often very preachy and very stodgy. The one that comes to mind is Gandhi, but I'm sure I've seen lots of others. Also, who would you love to see have a biopic and who should play them? Oh my. That's a whole starter kit. There's virtually anybody on my biography shelf could do with a good biopic if it was really spirited. But a lot of times they aren't. I'd have to, and casting would be a whole other thing. I'd have to give that more thought. Manbro Joho says, what are some of your favorite historical writings from the medieval period? How much time do you have? Chaucer counts, right? And Gerald of Wales, and the Venerable Bede. What is the most memorable classical music performance you have ever attended? Well, for me, it was a performance of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto by a Soviet pianist who just knocked it out of the park. What are some musical artists you like that people wouldn't expect you to be a fan of? I have no idea. I honestly have no idea. What do people expect as my musical taste? I always joke that it's all John Philip Sousa all the time, so I don't know what anybody would know. Or quick opinions on some writers. Oh my God, this never works in a Q&A. People always do it, but it never works. What is the list this time? Jack Vance, Samuel Beckett, Franz Kafka, Alfred Bester, Christopher Tyrrell. Oh, for Pete's sake, no. I have opinions on these things, but I am not an Amazon star system. I am not a Yelp review. There's no way that I can do this. This is one of the kinds of questions that comes up in these Q&As that I just can't do. Let's just move on. Joseph Green has a barrage of questions. Number 1, as a Midwesterner, I'm wondering what your impressions of St. Louis, Missouri. I liked it. I've been there a couple of times and liked it. Number 2, your thoughts on Stanley Elkin. I like him. Not love, just like. Number 3, in your last Q&A, you mentioned how Mailer, Updike, and Roth overshadowed women writers of the second half of the 20th century. Any names or books come to mind? Well, names, yeah. There's Lillian Hellman, Muriel Spark, Barbara Pym, a whole bunch of people, even in the English-speaking world, a whole bunch of names come to mind that are considered distaff writers instead of just normal writers, just writers full stop. And they are that way because very much these gigantic male egos wanted them to be that way. And number 4, thoughts on James Fry's A Million Little Pieces controversy. Well, it didn't catch me by surprise. I was actually reading A Million Little Pieces as a sort of a pre-BookTube buddy read with a friend of mine before the controversy. And I remember thinking when I was reading it, this isn't real. This has all the symmetry of the made-up stories, which is why I hate the made-up stories, because they have this kind of fake symmetry. If this were real, it wouldn't have those kinds of things. It wouldn't. No, this is mostly fabricated, almost all fabricated. So when it happened, I wasn't all that surprised. Although I was a little disappointed because although what I was read fabricated, it was also really well done. I hated the idea that the author was being cast out into the darkness. Blue Sky says 4,000 videos. You more than deserve it. Really? Oh, do I? We're approaching 4,000 videos. We'll be there soon, probably in March. Luke and Jennifer Higgins have a barrage of questions. They say, congratulations on 10K, much deserved. Is it really, though? Really? Number one is, do you enjoy the Captain Alistair books of Arturo Perez Reverte? I do. I don't enjoy them as much as some other readers do. Number two, we are considering reading The Quincunx by Charles Palliser for March of the Mammoths. What's your take on the novel? It's very good. It's very good. It's very similar to Lampre's Dictionary by Lawrence Norfolk, and also The Eight by Catherine Neville, in that it will really work you over. It's a workout of a book, but a really good choice. Especially if you can find a nice, pretty hardcover. I don't have a nice, pretty hardcover. Number three, Amelia would like to know, what is your favorite Girl Scout cookie? If you like Thin Mints, are they better at room temperature or frozen? I like the kind of thin mint flavor of Girl Scout cookies, and I do like Thin Mints, but you have to keep in mind, I was raised and socialized by a non-human species, and we don't do anything with refrigerated stuff. I like everything better at room temperature than anything frozen. Hugo Simeo says, congratulations on 10K. If anyone deserves it, it is you. Really, though? Do I? First video of yours I ever watched was your March of the Penguins Orlando Furioso, after I got an illustrated version by Gustave Doré. I would love an illustrated version of Orlando Furioso in the Penguin translation with Gustave Doré illustrations. That would be incredible. With that said, what do you think of Doré's work? I love it. Just love it. I think he's great. Random Stuff says, you had around 6.5K subscribers when I joined in the fun. I've seen most of your videos during the strict lockdown in my country, and they've been immensely helpful in keeping my good spirits up. Well, that's good to know. I'm very happy about that. Questions. Number one, what do you think of Elif Shafak's book, particularly The Free Palace? I like all of her books. I know she's hot or cold on a lot of parts of BookTube, but I like all of her work. And number two, can you talk more in depth about Royal Tyler's translation of The Tale of Genji? I can, not in a Q&A. I could go on and on about it and the choices that he makes, but not in a Q&A, except to say it's really good. It's a really good translation. Anna Alist says, congratulations on 10K. I saw in one of your videos that you really like Mary McCarthy's The Stones of Florence and Venice Observed, as did I. What other McCarthy books would you recommend? I would recommend them all. She never wrote a bad book. I've already read The Groot, but I did not love it in the same way that I loved her travel logs. Maybe it just means that you'll like her nonfiction better than her fiction. I do, so you could. Also, what are your favorite postmodernists? I never know how to answer this question. I never know who counts. I'm just going to punt. Jovinki Inky Impressions says, congratulations, thank you. Sarah Richards says, 10.4K now. What will happen next? I'm confident it will level off and stop. And as it's March of the Mammoths, please a Chunkster starter kit. I thought I already did one of those. Didn't I do a video on called In Praise of Chunksters? Something like that. It would certainly count as a starter kit. I could do another one. William S. says, what are your thoughts on Epicureanism? And what books of Erasmus would you recommend to read first? I know Latin, so translation isn't a concern. I like Epicureanism's emphasis on thinking about what you're doing, looking around you, having the perspective, taking a deep breath, as my generation would have said. But it's ultimately a cowardly philosophy, and I don't like that act about it. You are here to get involved. You are here to care about the things and people that are all around you. You're only getting this one try. Epicureanism seems to say, no, just concentrate on not having a stomach ache, concentrating on not having a toothache, and let the rest of it just go. Don't get all worked up about things that don't concern you. And that seems to me both self-centered and cowardly. You're not here for a smooth ride. You're here to care and get involved, and sometimes that's messy. And as to Erasmus, he did a little thing called Julius Exclusus, a funny little work in which Pope Julius II dies and goes to heaven and is at the pearly gates and is refused entry. And he's outraged because he's the Pope. And it's a great way for Erasmus to comment on his corrupt papacy and on the corrupt state of the church in general, and get in some very funny digs. And those digs work better in Erasmus's Latin than they do in English. So if you can read the original, that would be great. Let's see here. Penguin Ought to Do, a selected works of Erasmus. A 1,000-page book that has a lot of the colloquies and that has the whole of the Julius Exclusus and a bunch of other stuff, but they don't. Anyway, Ducky Little Dictum says, Steve, are you a Patrick Dennis fan? Auntie Mame is one of the few books that began as a novel and subsequently became a stage play, a film, a musical, and a film of that musical. To what do you attribute its longevity? Well, it's really good, really enjoyable. Plus, it never hurts if you've got the gays on your side. They'll never let Auntie Mame die. That's good for Auntie Mame. Casper Heilman says, you have mentioned that you would like to write a work on President Taft. I've actually done that twice. I wrote an 800-page novel about President Taft, and I didn't like it, so I scrapped it and wrote another 800-page novel about President Taft that was significantly different. And I didn't like that either. What has drawn you to President Taft? Well, he's endlessly interesting on his own. Once you get to know him, once you start to read about him in detail, which is not that easy to do, but also interesting for me in that he was one of the few prominent figures in American history, really prominent figures, who didn't really want power. Most of them are preening narcissists, and he wasn't. That makes him kind of interesting to me. Janet Smith says, you are unique. That's why. Total niche. Okay, if you say so. Chi Anna Nicole says, I want to take this opportunity to beg you to do more read-alongs. I have started and failed to finish both The Fairy Queen and Orlando Furioso. They are just so intimidating to me. Without your guidance, I, and I suspect many others, would never finish these great works. You would be keeping these authors from fading into oblivion by forging a new readership. I don't know that that would be true. They are going to fade into oblivion, especially the two you name. I've been shying away from doing read-alongs on this channel because I don't want to let you down. I don't want to start a read-along and then not do it. Have a day come along where I don't do it. But maybe I should rethink that. Because they are a lot of fun when we do them. Frida. Hang on just a second. Okay. All right. Michael Mullins says, despite all evidence to the contrary, 10,000 people in our society like intelligent discourse about books by an erudite and engaging host. Congratulations on this milestone. My question involves large books, specifically those over 1,000 pages. Do you generally read these in one day or stretched out over a couple of days? Also, do you have an idea of the ratio of such behemoths to more typical slender books? In a given week, how many of the books you read will break a 1,000-page barrier? Any suggestions for tackling these books? I know brevity is the soul of wit, a thought which runs contrary to the spirit of the books in question, but I hope you will count this as one large question on a single subject. It was still a huge paragraph, but nevertheless, I love them, but I don't read that many of them. I mostly stick to new releases in the American book market, and American publishers do not like huge books like that. They work against them. They're extra expensive to make, and they're the kiss of death to sell and market, so they mostly don't want to do them. That's why if you look at a book catalog, you'll see that a lot of the new releases are not only around 240 pages, but exactly 240 pages. Almost like a bed of Procrustes has been used on them. I love huge books because, of course, I can sink my way into them. I take my time with them, but I don't get that many of them. In 2021 so far, I've only encountered 2. Jim's Books, Reading, and Stuff says, have the views gone up proportionally to the subscriber count? I don't think so. No. I'm not the best mind to look at such a thing, but I don't think they have. I think something weird went on in late February and early March, and it has not stopped. But I don't know what it is. I'll figure it out. Jenny Parks says, we are all just drawn to your glowing, youthful enthusiasm. Why, thank you. Number 1, do you think you'll do more Dude Bro videos? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The response I got in emails to Bro Watch, a series that I started this year, was very positive. So I will find another victim and dissect them in due course in March. Number 2, would you ever do your own version of comparing books to movie adaptations? Yes, absolutely. Talk about a starter kit. That's a long starter kit. I could talk forever on that subject. Number 3, do you have any marching orders for your ever-growing army? I like to think I don't have an army. I've heard from a couple of different people that I do, but I'd like to think that I don't. I don't have any marching orders. No. No. Although, I don't have any marching orders at all. No. User Naeem says, what are the top 5 or 3 if you want pension novels? I honestly don't rank them like that. I honestly don't. And what do you think of William T. Vollmann in general and Fathers and Crows in particular? I like Fathers and Crows quite a bit, and I think he's generally really good, a generally important writer working in our midst. John Gagarakis says, number 1, what do you think of the poetry of Robert Bly? It stinks. Also, is his book Iron John worth reading, or is it similar to the kind of thing Jordan Peterson did in his execrable 12 Rules of Life? It's very similar, and it's not worth your time. Number 2, what are some of your favorite translators' introductions? Oh my God, we could be here all day. I have many of them I could single out. You're right to insinuate that it's a kind of art form to do, and I appreciate them, but there's no way I could pick a few off the top of my head. Right, Rainbow Sky Gay and Proud says, my first question is, do you know any gay essayists that are really good at thinking and talking about fiction and storytelling, and can you recommend some? Nope, I don't. Not that are gay self-identified. I mean, essayists who are gay, but that isn't part of what they write about, maybe. Somebody like E.M. Forster, but not otherwise. Second question, can you talk about the sins of feminist literature, because a lot of men, and especially gay men, think that feminist literature is fallacious and that it can do no wrong, and we both know that's not true. Well, it's not fallacious just across the board. The bad part, the overreaching stuff, the stupid stuff, the blue-haired stuff from the 21st century, I don't like even to call it feminist literature, because great feminist literature is utterly towering in its challenge to complacency. And a lot of the stuff that I have read in the 21st century that's billed as feminist literature is just dumb. It's just stupid. And unavoidable to draw the conclusion that the author is also personally stupid and not just writing down to an audience. So I don't know. I wouldn't write it off as fallacious, but a lot of it's not represented well in the 21st century, that's for sure. Question 3, you talked about how you don't know what gay fiction is now because it's been so thoroughly used by politics. Can you talk more about that? I can, but not in a Q&A. That's a huge discussion video. Last question, can you talk about the sins of literary criticism, and what alternatives to literary criticism would you recommend? Literary criticism doesn't do anything but sin. Its main sin is that it makes reading a dull chore. The alternative is to read book criticism. Read book reviews. Find a whole bunch of book reviews and read them. Read book reviews. They are the absolute antidote to literary criticism. William Fett says, hi Steve, what are your opinions on Cornell Woolrich, Lawrence Block, and John D. MacDonald? A couple of those have come up already. I like all three of them. Bamboo Jones says, I viewed A Day Late and the count is already 10.4. Yes, but it stopped. It is not going up like this, and it was for a while. For 2 weeks it was doing this. It's not doing that anymore. So whatever that was, I think it's over. I just don't know what it was. Freaky deaky, not really. I'm not surprised. Well, I am. My question, if Frida had her own animal companion excluding yourself, what would it be? Mythological, alien, or chimeras can be considered a long time everyday earthlings. I think she'd be fine with another dog. Or more than one dog. She's not aggressive at all. She's very bossy, but she's not aggressive at all. If she got used to another dog being here, there would be no problem at all. Jake Port says, congratulations on 10K subs. Thank you. I have a few questions, of course. Number 1, which Thomas Pynchon novel is your favorite? My favorite is Mason and Dixon. But I don't rank them. You're asking about early Pynchon and late Pynchon. I just don't think about them that much. I just don't. Number 2, what do you think of The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne? I really like it. Very enjoyable. Number 3, can you recommend any books about the Pacific campaign of World War II? Well, there was Tower of Skulls from last year, I think, or the year before that. And Samuel Eliot Morison, all of his volumes on the Pacific theater, but also Two Ocean War, his one-volume abridgment of his big work, but lots of others too. John Dimbleby did another one, the War I think he did War in the Atlantic and War in the Pacific. Maybe War in the Pacific is not one of his. I've read a lot on the subject. I have a whole half a shelf of it out in the other room. I could make a starter kit on the Pacific theater in World War II. Also, have you seen the HBO series The Pacific? And if so, what did you think of it? I have seen it. Yeah, I liked it. Kanan Hadzik says, do you believe in free will? Sam Harris and Robert Sapolsky think it is just an illusion. What is your opinion? I honestly don't know why they and other people think free will is an illusion. I guess it has to do with some sort of philosophical debate into quiddities and categories, and that all of those kinds of debates are nonsense. They're all nonsense. They're all just showing off. Of course you have free will. Of course you do. In the colloquially understood sense of deciding to do one thing instead of another. Now, I know that some of these people say, well, but you were only ever going to do one thing. So you didn't have free will. You were always going to do that one. I never understand what to make of that. It's not in the real world. Like all philosophical debates, it's not in the real world. It's not part of the real world. It's not part of real experience. So I never know what to do with grown adults that say something nonsensical like that. Of course you have free will. Of course you do. Of course it exists. DDB says, I think Lord Ganesha could be the reason for the upsurge in subscribers. I doubt it very much. I doubt it very much. He's very stingy on the help that he gives to other people. My question is, for 2 recommendations on the same topic, can you recommend an engaging book about the Industrial Revolution from a British and or European perspective, and also from an American perspective? I don't know the subject really well. I read a book by Peter Stearns that was really good. I could certainly recommend that. Joff says, you have 10,000 subscribers because people love your opinionated, kooky, knowledgeable videos. It's simple. Okay. 3 questions. Number 1, what do you think of John Crowley, especially his novel Little Big? I like it quite a bit. Number 2, I am intimidated by Merwin Peake. Are the Gormenghast novels worth their enormous length? They are. Yeah, it takes a bit of getting used to understand the rhythm of what he's doing. Gormenghast is not a particularly inviting reading experience until you get into it, but they're well worth it when you do. And number 3, where do you put Ursula K. Le Guin amidst the pantheon of modern American novelists? Right up there. Her great novels are really great. Kay the Reader says, congratulations, thank you. Andrew Russell has a barrage of questions. Number 1, you recently stated your dislike of the practice of fishing. I just wondered whether this extended to fishing for food, either as a subsistence basis or on an industrial scale that is required to cater to developed countries. Change their tastes. No one fishes for subsistence. They can all change their tastes, and so can industrial countries. It's not required for either one of those things. There's no requirement to kill someone. There's no requirement to kill someone. That is a human way to look at the world. So no, my opinion doesn't change when you go to the industrial level or anything like that. Number 2, do you think that the hackneyed phrase, things were just different back then, can ever be used to justify writings which may be classed as bad taste when viewed through a modern lens on issues such as race or gender equality? Sure, it can happen if there's other worth. If there's other worth and those things are just part of it, then sure, you should absolutely not dismiss the whole thing. Just think, put it in context, and talk about it that way. It's very much in the news because of the nonsense that you've seen on the floor of the United States Senate with senators, grown men, complaining about Dr. Seuss being canceled. When it's the Seuss estate itself, in this particular case, it was not blue-haired, blue checkmark Twitter scolds that caused this. It was the Seuss estate itself looking at a handful of his books. He wrote 1,000 books. Looking at a handful of his books and seeing really horrible racial stuff, really horrible racial visual iconography and whatnot. You'll find a lot of that same kind of stuff if you look back far enough in New Yorker cartoons. And they decided, these books are not part of a critical adult conversation in which an adult will say, okay, that was part of the discourse, but here are some worthwhile parts. No, these are going out to children. These books are for children. And these things shouldn't be given out to children. This isn't how we look at the world anymore. And so the Seuss estate decided to withdraw those books from reprinting. And that's a completely different thing. That is not Dr. Seuss being canceled. Dr. Seuss is not being canceled. I don't know where that... Well, actually, I do know where that comes from. The senators who have been complaining nonstop for 5 days about Dr. Seuss being canceled want very much to distract you from the fact that they are voting en masse. They're voting in a Republican bloc to deny you a higher minimum wage in the middle of a pandemic. To gut a pandemic relief bill or have it voted into existence over their dead clasping hands. Bring the vice president in and have her break a tie because you are going to your grave to make sure this relief money doesn't go out to the country. The people who are doing that are the ones telling you that Dr. Seuss is being canceled. He's not being canceled. So, but for instance, the New Yorker cartoons aren't going out to children, and they are valuable. The horrible, lazy, racist imagery in those early New Yorker cartoons is valuable to look at in the context of other cartoons, in the context of visual representation of, black Pullman porters or black musicians or whatnot. It's painful to look at, yes, but it wasn't done in malice when it was done by the New Yorker 100 years ago, and therefore the New Yorker was not was not overtly racist as a production 100 years ago. It was just reflecting the imagery, the iconography of the time, which you can say was mostly racist, but one way or another, worth studying in that case, but only because the recipient audience is going to study it. That's a very different case for kids' books. Anyway, where were we here? Uh, uh, oh, okay. And then question number 3: thoughts on Jill Lepore's These Truths? I like it very much. I reviewed it for the Christian Science Monitor to that effect. Maximus H. Stetich says, Dear Steve, what are your thoughts on capital punishment? This gets touchy. We don't want to talk politics too much on this channel, especially where honest, upright people can disagree, and this is one of those subjects. I am in favor of capital punishment. I believe there is a contract that people make when they decide to live together in giant communities. I believe that contract has to be there, or it's not possible to live together in giant communities. And I believe that living together in giant communities, cities, communities, is a net benefit. It's a net positive for the people who live there, for the people who live in those things, in those communities. And if you violate that contract and kill someone, I believe the only just punishment is for you also to be killed. The problem comes immediately when you descend from the philosophical level to the implementation, where you see all kinds of problems, all kinds of problems. And those I acknowledge. For instance, in America's benighted history, hugely greater percentage of black people on death row or executed than white people for exactly the same crimes. Or a huge amount of cases that were later discovered that the person who was executed was in fact innocent. That is horrible. That's horrible to think about. So I guess I'm in favor of the death penalty as a theory. But in practice, it would have to be a lot better than it is, or reserved for very rare instances where the guilt is not in question, where there is no question of guilt. Kyle Rittenhouse, for instance, who's a folk hero for the senators I just mentioned, grown elected lawmakers who make the laws in this country, and he's a folk hero to them, a murderer. There is no doubt whatsoever what he did or why he did it. There is no doubt at any point in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse. He should be put to death. Same thing with the one surviving Boston Marathon bomber, who's going to live to a ripe old age in incarceration. He should have been put to death as soon as video surfaced of him laughing at the scene of the crime. There's no doubt about what he did. None. If there's no doubt of your guilt, so it's not a question of fingerprints turning up later on, or DNA evidence, or racial bias on the part of a jury. If there's no doubt of your guilt and you have committed murder, you should die. But that's a very rare instance. That doesn't happen often. Sue New says, number 1, what do you think of Raymond Carver's works? I think they stink. Number 2, what book, one fiction, one nonfiction, would you rate as legendary, must-read, or something like a 5-star, just all-around great work? It depends on the reader. There's all sorts of books that would fit that category, or might. It would depend on the reader. Colo 1546 says, number 1, will Troy War, Steve Donoghue's Ulysses, and the Telemachiad ever be published? Those are 3 novels, a trilogy that I did adapting the Homeric cycle. So the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then the adventures of Odysseus' teenage son, Telemachus. And I don't know that they'll ever be published. They were a lot of fun to write, though. Number 2, would you do a page 112 read of one of your own unpublished works and then critique it? That's a terrific idea. Yes, I'll put that on the list. And number 3, should Thomas Paine be considered a founding father? What would the independence movement have looked like without his writings? It wouldn't have happened. He definitely should be considered a founding father. There's something to be said for a runaway pamphlet that gets under everybody's skin. It suddenly gives everybody a vocabulary, a shared vocabulary for what is going on here that they lacked before. So yeah, he should be. And that, let's do one more. Darren S. says, what is your take on Alan Nevis' Civil War mega series? Does it compare favorably to the better-known multi-volume series by Bruce Catton and Shelby Foote? Yeah, it does. I just recently found it. I saw it mentioned on Bill Rutenberg's channel, the Rutenberg Library, and then I found the whole set in paperback at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston. I read the first 2 volumes again for the first time in 45 years and was impressed. They aren't typical, but really good. I'm very glad I found them. I will get to the other 2 volumes this year. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up. We'll be back again.